All right, hello everyone. We're back. Today, we are talking about the Dark City. Just kidding. We're talking about the Matrix. Well, it's not 100% true. We are going to talk a little bit about the Dark City because looking at these two movies next to each other is rather interesting. I mean, they come out just a year apart. It's like this movie here is 1998, this movie here, 1999. And maybe you've heard, since they're both filmed in Australia, they even reused some of the sets from Dark City and The Matrix. So there's this kind of, since the beginning, this kind of brother-sister film kind of going on there with that. And yet, as we can see, if we look at the box office here, they have some pretty different outcomes. The themes are very similar. They definitely have this sense of a reality is not what it seems kind of idea within a science fiction realm, kind of dark aesthetic, lots of things that seem similar on the outside, and yet huge difference as far as box office return. We're talking about Dark City, 27 million worldwide. It's like, hopefully they made back their budget with that. I don't know. And then maybe with home video release, maybe they did okay. Matrix, almost 500 million worldwide, and then a really great home video release as well, as evidence of basically everyone that you know having like a Matrix DVD when they were in the early 2000s. So, and that was definitely how I saw The Matrix, was on TV and through home video. So that's it's one of those staples of anyone's home movie collection back when that was a thing. So anyway, obviously these two films have very different outcomes as far as their place in the cultural dialogue. It has been fun to see people talk about the Dark City a little bit more in the last year or two. So it's fun that it's getting that revival. But there's no question that The Matrix has this huge place in our consciousness. And it's like we still have, as we mentioned last time, these memes, these kind of ways in which we're digesting the film or appropriating its symbols and ideas for other purposes. And there's this kind of sense that it's like a wellspring of metaphor and ideas that actually speak to our time in some way. So that's interesting. It's like not every blockbuster has anything like that, even if it would have made more money at the time than The Matrix. It's like there's not that many films that have had that kind of run where we're still talking about what the ideas are in those films in many ways. So I thought that'd be worth going into. And then, really, when we're talking about this title here, The Lasting Resonance of the Matrix, it's like we're going to have to look at the themes of the Matrix and its legacy in ways that are going to take us a bit further afield. And we're going to talk about a little bit about Simulacra and Simulation by John Baudrillard. That's well known as an influence on the Matrix. We're going to unpack that a little bit because it's going to be, I think, a key in understanding why this movie has continued to stick around. Now, to get into this, we're just going to hop right into the beginning of the Dark City, because I thought we should compare the openings. We should see, again, these films look similar, so what's going on? Why did one do well, and why did one kind of fall into obscurity? So here we go. now I gotta skip a little bit for content reasons with this film, but we can say a little bit already about this opening. Just already, like if you just thought of the two movies, it's like, wow, this imagery is very similar. You've got the city here, nighttime, green, kind of similar score. So yeah, I mean, again, at first glance, you're like, this is a very similar movie.
Confused, aren't you? Frightened. That's all right. I can help you. Who is this? I am a doctor. Now you must listen to me. You have lost your memory. There was an experiment. Something went wrong. Your memory was erased. Do you understand me?
No, I don't understand. What the hell is going on here?
Just listen. There are people coming for you, even as we speak. You must not let them find you. You must leave now. Hello? Are you there?
Okay, gonna pause it there because we're not here to watch the whole movie. So there's some really strong imagery in this film. I love the whole Art Deco kind of ageless look of everything. There's obviously this kind of more gothic quality than The Matrix. It has this kind of image of like a Nosferatu kind of classic villain, like this kind of profile. You know, you can just think of that in mind, like this German expressionism. Now, I think this will be it's a choice, that's for sure. You know, it's like, I don't know if it'll work for everyone. You know, maybe The Matrix scales better, a little bit of audience. Some people might see this and go, okay, it's kind of a little hokey, you know. So I think maybe that's working against it. It's also like it has this kind of more fable-like quality in a way. It's a little less grounded in the real world, which is funny to say because we're talking about The Matrix. But it's like it's less grounded than The Matrix, and yet it's also more mature because it's like I had to pause it for these content reasons and everything. And it's like, well, maybe there's a bit of a mismatch there as far as the two films. And it's like, well, both rated R movies, but we're going to see that The Matrix maybe scales better for general audiences in terms of what it shows and everything.
Yeah.
Is everything in place?
You weren't supposed to relieve me.
I know, but I felt like taking a shift.
You like him, don't you? You like watching him.
Don't be ridiculous.
We're gonna kill him. You understand that?
Morpheus believes he is the one.
Do you?
It doesn't matter what I believe.
You don't, do you?
Did you hear that?
Hear what?
Are you sure this line is clean?
Yeah, of course I'm sure.
I better go.
Lieutenant. Oh, shit. Lieutenant, you were given specific orders.
Hey, I'm just doing my job. You give me that jurist my diction crap, you can cram it up your ass.
The orders were for your protection.
I think we can handle one little girl. I sent 2 units. They're bringing her down now.
No, Lieutenant, your men are already dead.
So what's something we notice about both these openings? They're not 80s tone openings like Top Gun. They are throwing you immediately into the action. It's a cold opening. And again, it's like you can do either one. You can do whatever you want at the opening. You just have to make it work. And the Matrix is the perfect example of that, I think. I mean, this whole sequence is just classic. I think it's kind of burnt into everyone's mind who saw it. It's a little dated now, but not that much. Not so much that it really, I think, prevents you from enjoying it. I think both these films have really strong openings, but The Matrix is even stronger. Yeah, I mean, we could talk the whole time about the just great visuals of this film, but we're going to just move on for now, because we're not here to just talk about special effects. We're here to talk about why this movie did well, and why it stuck with us. So if you watched the last video, you probably saw something like this slide here. And I felt like this would be useful to bring back because we could talk about these two movies next to each other in this sense. As we talked about, it's like, you know, what's a movie need to resonate with an audience? It's not just novelty. It's familiarity as well. It has to be well executed and everything. You could kind of use this framework across the spectrum to evaluate both these films. One section that we've added since last time is this telos, and we're just calling that really the purpose of a film. It has to feel like it has some reason to exist, that it's not just a money grab. And then, of course, zeitgeist, which is less about, in this case for The Matrix, it's really what we're going to be talking about the most today, which is why is it so long-lasting? Why has it stayed in the zeitgeist? But we can say some things right off the bat about the first two sections here, familiarity and novelty. Really, I think The Dark City, it could be a victim of being too novel in some way. We talk about, again, this balance of needing to have something in which you can link the audience to. And I think The Matrix is known, and a lot of people have talked about how well it kind of synthesizes a lot of different science fiction ideas that are in the consciousness, and also martial arts films, kung fu movies, and everything. You've got a lot of different influences here. This top is maybe a more obscure one. This is called World on a Wire, and this is a Rainer Werner Fassbinder movie from, I think, the late 60s or early 70s. And I don't know if the Wachowskis were explicitly thinking about this movie, but it's definitely one of those early films that is thinking about this kind of nested reality within another setting. Of course, you have Ghost in the Shell, you have Hard Boiled, you've got Fist of Legend, you've got Total Recall, Blade Runner. All of these have, well, if not thematic, then they have stylistic similarities and things that are going to influence the Wachowskis. And again, last time we also talked about, you know, what people call stealing artistically. But we can more say this is, instead of calling it stealing, we can say influence. These films definitely influence The Matrix and influence the Wachowskis as they're thinking about their film. But these are also touchstones for the audience. They're things that make people go, oh, okay, that's familiar. They see the martial arts in this new Western context, and it's like, oh wow, that's something that was there. I knew about it. Maybe they weren't watching it, or maybe you were. But then you see it in this new context, and there's this reinvention of it there. So that's cool. If we were to watch later into The Dark City, we'd see that the visuals are a bit more crazy. They're a bit more zany. And I think that maybe works against it as being almost too ungrounded. The Matrix comes away from this looking very realistic in its portrayal, which is interesting. There's just something about the quality of the film and the way that the world looks at the time where you kind of buy into the world as you see it. even if it's extreme and there's all these people doing these incredible things. There's something about the world that's just believable, and I think that works in its favor. So they both have this novelty of showing you this new kind of incredible world, but it's in the familiarity that The Matrix really shines by pulling together all these sources. It's not like The Dark City doesn't have any sources or anything, but they're seeming to be coming together in The Matrix in a more musical way, perhaps. And again, none of this is to lambast The Dark City. I actually quite enjoy the film, but there's something about it that's not connecting with the audience as much. It's also telling that I had to skip through sections of the opening of Dark City because of content stuff. And that is very important in the sense of, being a good uncle movie. It's like you go over when you're a kid and your uncle shows you The Matrix because it's like, oh, you got to check out the lobby scene. Like, this is so cool. You want to show off my new sound system to my nephew. It's like, that is how many kids saw The Matrix that way, or saw it not in the theater, but at home. And The Matrix is a movie that, yes, it's rated R, but there was something about how it was done that gives it this kind of approachability and everything that maybe The Dark City didn't have. So this movie, it has this problem of being even more ungrounded from reality than The Matrix, and yet it's also a little hokey. Again, getting back to the Nosferatu kind of things, it's like, I don't mind it. I think it's pretty cool, but it's not going to be for everyone. There's definitely more people that they're losing that way, and in a way, it's almost kind of more childish or more whimsy in that sense, and that's paired with also being more thematic, having more adult content that you're not going to be able to show your kids. So there's a lot of things that are kind of mixing together where it's both a little bit less believable and also less applicable to children. So there's like all these different factors that are working together to make it not as approachable for a general audience. And again, it's nothing to say about the movie itself. It definitely has a lot of things that are quite fun about it and interesting. But yeah, it kind of, as if we go back to the box office, I think those are the things we can talk about as far as why it maybe didn't succeed when it came out. And hopefully it'll continue to have a little bit of a resurgence here. Now, having said that, we are going to get back to The Matrix, because the question then becomes, okay, well, it's revolutionary at the time. We've got this bullet time. We have this cool stuff. Every kid is doing this. Oh, whoa, Neo. So for years, we've got that going on. But then it's like, as that gets digested, you think, okay, well, there's newer stuff. Why then does this movie continue to stick around?
What the hell? Oh, wet rabbit. Who is it? It's Joy. Yeah.
You're 2 hours late.
I know. It's her fault.
You got the money?
$2,000.
Hold up.
This is our chance to introduce Mr. Baudrillard, Simulacra and Simulation guy. And this is a French professor, postmodernist thinker. The book is really a critique on how the media in some way invades every aspect of our life. The key is to not get stuck on this word simulation and think he's talking about a literal matrix, like he's talking about, oh, we live in a simulation. No, he's saying our media environment is full of simulations of life in some way that are completely overwhelming our ability to even navigate the world in a meaningful way. So that's the premise. We'll get into that. It's interesting that Neo opens this book to the chapter on nihilism here. And I think this is telling us something that's very deliberate about this placement of this book. For one thing, this one that I showed you here, I think, as far as I know, this is the only version that's available in English. And so I've not been able to find any copy like the one that's in the film there, so I assume that's just production design. And also, it's like, that means they got a specific version made for the film that looks more cinematic, which means they wanted to put this book in so bad that they literally made their own version of the book so that they could put it in a way that fit the world. And of course, they gave it a green color because the Matrix green. So, also, this chapter on nihilism, let's see if I can find it here. This is it's like the last few pages of the book. Look at where that is. And this is on nihilism. Let me make sure that looks good there. Yeah, on nihilism. And you can see it's the same font and everything, exactly the same, but just in this hardcover. And that's also in the first third of the book, so that there's space for that hole in it and everything. So that means the Wachowskis were like, oh, well, if we're going to build our own prop, what page do we want him to open it to? Well, let's do this chapter there. So that's kind of a clue. It's like you could look in that chapter and maybe think, well, how does this relate to the Matrix,
This is it? Let me give you one piece of advice. Be honest. He knows more than you can imagine.
At last. Welcome, Neo. As you no doubt have guessed, I am Morpheus.
It's an honor to meet you.
No. The honor is mine. Please, come, sit. I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole?
You could say that.
I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up. Ironically, this is not far from the truth. Do you believe in fate, Neo?
No,
Why not?
because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
I know exactly what you mean. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work.
When we talk about the resonance of this movie, we're really talking about the problem of modernity and our sense of alienation from it, or whatever that is. It seems like everyone has this sense to some degree. Now, a lot of times I think this has been maybe sublimated into the political, where we have maybe some more easier enemies to look at as reasons for why the world is the way it is, and the problems and some solutions that present themselves as maybe more tangible to why the world is. But I think the real reasoning and what this movie is about is a deeper kind of sense of wrongness about the world that we're in. And obviously it doesn't mean that we're, fully solipsistic. Of course, there are some people these days that are, which is crazy to see, but more and more people are. And by that we would mean basically believing that you are living in a matrix, a private matrix of your own in some sense. Now, it doesn't mean it was technological, but just the sense that you don't trust the external world at all. And here we have the famous image of the red pill and the blue pill, which has been memed and everything in ways that not everyone's very happy about, and that's very understandable to me. And then it's gone from very fringe internet sort of things into a more mainstream kind of culture of the right, of saying, okay, we're opting out of society, we're seeing the manipulation of society and everything, and we're waking up from that. So it's kind of taken on a broader meaning than maybe is the origins of the meme, and it's been used too on the other side as well. And I'll link. There's a good Wikipedia article that just kind of shows how many times there's a whole article on the red pill, blue pill that helps to show how many times that image has been used. So this sense that something is wrong in the world is pervading our world, and this also is really what Baudrillard is talking about. And again, it's interesting to note that Baudrillard didn't endorse The Matrix when it came out. He said it doesn't understand what he's talking about, and I think we can read later, but we'll see some of the quotes and everything, but he would see The Matrix as maybe too banal of a simulation for it to be what he's really thinking about. It would probably be what he would call a second order simulacrum. Instead of this thing that kind of pervades your whole world. It's too easy to externalize the danger, and therefore it's not a real simulacra that encompasses the world as it does. So that's really where he sees this film as falling apart in some way. But I think he's wrong, and I think it's because movies deal with very concrete imagery. We have to have set. We have to have a story, we have to have a narrative, we have to have bad guys and everything. And it turns out that, as we've seen with the way that this movie lasts, it's not the bullet time that we're still talking about. It's the ideas in The Matrix that still come up in some way. And we use The Matrix to reference, to say, oh no, it's like The Matrix. It's like, what if we're trapped in this sense and we wake up, it's like, well, it's like The Matrix. Oh, what's the metaverse? Oh, well, it's like The Matrix. It's like we're heading towards The Matrix, and we use it as this kind of vision of like, this is a bad future that we could head towards. And it's like, we're not talking about bullet time. We don't care about that. We're caring about this idea of living in an imaginary world in some way. And we have been able to take that idea and externalize it to not just mean, oh, we're literally going to wake up in a red tub like Neo does. We have been able to take that to mean something deeper in our society, or see ways that it applies to us in a deeper way, which is really what Baudrillard is trying to do. So I think he didn't give this movie enough credit. So today, abstraction is no longer that of the map, the double, the mirror, or the concept. Simulation is no longer that of a territory, a referential being, or a substance. It is the generation of models of a real without origin or reality, a hyperreal. The territory no longer precedes the map, nor does it survive it. It is nevertheless the map that precedes the territory, precession of the simulacra, that engenders the territory. And if one must return to the fable today, it is the territory whose shreds slowly rot across the extent of the map. It is the real and not the map whose vestiges persist here and there in the deserts that are no longer those of the empire but ours, the desert of the real itself. What he's talking about is basically the internet, and the manner in which our lives are totally consumed by our online experience or our phones. It's like, this is what he means when he's talking about the simulacra. He's not talking about the Matrix, something that is like a nice science fiction box that is neat and you can kind of see an edge to it. It's like you're either in the Matrix or you're not. It's like this has no edge. You can't tell where it ends and where it begins. And then you have the real, which is the world, but you're always seeing it through this lens of this device. You're always saying, oh, can I use what I'm seeing to create more content for this? Because this is where it lasts. And if I didn't capture it, then it's not really real. It didn't really happen there. So that's the hyper-real. You get a sense that this internet culture is kind of leading the charge in our sense of alienation, or our sense of isolation and inability to live together in some way. And this is, again, it's not something that is isolated to one political party. It's something that we're both experiencing the symptoms of it, so to speak, and the symptoms are maybe idiosyncratic to either side, but perhaps Baudrillard would allege that the cause is something deeper than political reasons here.
This is the construct. It's our loading program. We can load anything from clothing to equipment, weapons, training simulations, anything we need.
Right now, we're inside a computer program?
Is it really so hard to believe? Your clothes are different, the plugs in your arms and head are gone. Your hair has changed. Your appearance now is what we call residual self-image. It is the mental projection of your digital self.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. This is the world that you know. The world as it was at the end of the 20th century. It exists now only as part of a neural interactive simulation that we call the Matrix. You've been living in a dream world, Neo. This is the world as it exists today.
I gotta note that move through the TV.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
So this move through the TV is a key Baudrillardian kind of idea of the ambiguity of where the hyperreal ends and where reality begins. It's like now Morpheus is showing him the real world, but there's an irony because they're actually in a controlled version of the Matrix to show what reality is like. And then they're reflecting that irony in the TV, which we're moving through. And this is just carrying that idea on for us to remember. And if you think that image is arbitrary, then remember that they use it again in Matrix Reloaded when he talks to the architect. They're talking big philosophical stuff, and there's like 20, like there's like hundreds of Neo TVs behind him, and they move through that TV like 3 times just to make the point that this is an image that they're kind of toying with. And then you have this saying, "Welcome to the desert of the real," which is a great quote. It's definitely stuck in my mind for all these years. And Slavoj Žižek as well even wrote a book with that title for his kind of take on modernity in some way. I haven't read that book, but I just found that I thought that was interesting, that it's kind of made that impression. And then again, we had that Baudrillard quote that we just read where he mentions this desert of the real itself. So what is that desert? And to me, I think what he means is it is basically the remnants of the world that are not touched by our precession of simulacra, of our digital world and everything. And those things are isolated places that in some sense don't exist. They don't matter in some way. And that's a shame. And remember, this is just Baudrillard's view. You don't have to agree with him. He's a postmodernist. He has, a lot of really negative things to say about the future of humanity. So it can be something that you fall into. This book is definitely difficult and challenging in some ways. And I don't think you have to accept everything that he says. But in so much as our culture is suffering the effects of maybe a nihilistic world, suffering the effects of living in this hyper-real media landscape, his critiques apply. And it doesn't mean that we accept the conclusions or we accept maybe any prescriptions for what we do, but the correspondence of our world to what he describes, I think if you were to read this, it's kind of startling with the things he's predicting. Basically, any time that he uses the word TV in this book, just replace it with the internet or with Twitter, with social media, with Instagram, and you'll understand the book better. If you just, anytime he says TV, the media, the system, just okay, the internet. What, these things, this is going to be the clue to tell you how he's thinking about things. And of course, this book is originally written in French in 1981, so the internet's not even on the public mind yet. And yet he's kind of seeing these things and the way in which it's going to be going. So all of that really, which he's seeing in television culture, just gets more extreme when we get to the internet and everything. And then we see over time, of course, we have this red pill, blue pill, which is a great symbol of the stratification of society, really, in some way. And it's interesting, of course, that this image has become a polarizing meme, because it's literally saying, well, there's those that are not awakened to the reality that we're kind of living in this kind of fake world, and those who just will stay in it, and those who will just continue to do this, and those who are sleeping. And so that dichotomy is getting pointed to with this pill imagery. And then once you're outside, it's like you sit on a bus and you see everyone sitting on your phones, and you're the only person sitting there, sitting on the bus, feeling the bus rattle and move and shake, and you're completely alone, even though you're surrounded by people. And that's the desert of the real.
Bits and pieces of information, but what we know for certain is that at some point in the early 21st century, all of mankind was united in celebration. We marveled at our own magnificence as we gave birth to AI.
AI? Artificial intelligence.
A singular consciousness that spawned an entire race of machines. We don't know who struck first, us or them, but we know that it was us that scorched the sky. At the time, they were dependent on solar power, and it was believed that they would be unable to survive without an energy source as abundant as the sun. Throughout human history, we have been dependent on machines to survive. Fate, it seems, is not without a sense of irony. The human body generates more bioelectricity than a 120-volt battery and over 25,000 BTUs of body heat. Combined with a form of fusion, the machines had found all the energy they would ever need. There are fields, endless fields, where human beings are no longer born. We are grown. For the longest time, I wouldn't believe it. And then I saw the fields with my own eyes. Watched them liquefy the dead so they could be fed intravenously to the living. And standing there, facing the pure, horrifying precision, I came to realize the obviousness of the truth. What is the Matrix? Control. The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world, built to keep us under control in order to change a human being into this.
So yeah, this has always been a kind of disturbing scene, and it's disturbing because it's relevant. I think the resonance of this image has only grown in years when we think about what's come to light just in recent times of people discussing how we're all kind of used by the social media companies to sell advertisements and everything. And this is the whole way that the internet runs, is it's this game of sucking our attention up through our devices, through our engagement, to sell advertisements and to make profit for the companies. And they have all this identity information that they have on us and what supposed things we like based on what we click on and so forth. And in this way, we're getting used, not unlike in the Matrix, to generate income instead of power, in our case. But it's like the metaphor holds when you see it this way. Now, the only thing I would want to avoid doing is, again, getting too political or getting too it's us versus them in this sort of way. It's like, this is the problem with the system, is that it's so diffuse and it's not easy to point to a single person working. It's like our whole society has this whole incentive structure, which is leading us into this situation. So we don't want to jump to conclusions, at least not yet, about what's causing this and everything. And that's definitely the conspiratorial impulse. That's definitely where this film has caught on with, in a more fringe way as well, as pointing to, you know, this elite cabals and everything, or the deep state, or just the corporations writ large, as being the main villain behind the scenes controlling everything. And that's really that's an easy, comfortable way to look at it. But the trouble is again, if we go to Baudrillard, it's like, no, it's not just that. It's the whole way that we've constructed the modern world. So it's like, how do we get out of that?
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. When you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress?
I was...
Look again. Where is it?
This isn't the Matrix.
No. It's another training program designed to teach you one thing. If you are not one of us, you are one of them.
So here's another idea that really resonates in our culture now. I mean, this image, unfortunately, is kind of like our experience of 2020, I must say. And this, again, I'm not trying to be saying this in a political way. I think the lesson we can draw, especially from Baudrillard, is that this applies to both sides of the political spectrum. We have two different situations. We have the George Floyd riots, and then we have the Stop the Steal riot at the beginning of 2021. And these are from opposite sides of the political spectrum, and they're both things that erupt into physical violence and everything over something that we largely experience, again, through the devices, not through our personal experience. And then this image of, you know, everyday people walking around, but they're all plugged into the system. And that means that they can immediately become a threat to you at any moment. This is what the digital landscape feels like in the modern world, where we have a sense that all our actions are being monitored. We need to say everything in the right way. And if we speak up in some way and we're misunderstood, or if our intent isn't properly, if we don't make the right signs of what we're saying, or we just speak honestly, and yet in a way that isn't going to vibe with, say, 50% of the population, then the people you're conversing with turn into Agent Smith. They turn into someone who's going to come track you down and kill you. And what happens if you stand up against it? It's a futile thing, because even if you win in one internet exchange, let's say, then there's another agent. He can just repopulate again. And what happens when someone you're talking to kind of gets taken in by sort of a more radical view of the world? They are de-individualized. They turn into just a G-man who's holding a gun to your face. So it's like this idea of this Agent Smith figure he appears, and he has no identity really of his own. He's just this figure that is out there, and any person that you meet can turn into him at any time and hold the gun to your face. And even if you were to successfully kill him, he'll just respawn in the next person. this is what being online feels like. And the only thing that happens when you stand up is martyrdom. You only can lose, and in some vain attempt to kind of sacrifice yourself in some way. Again, I'm not trying to say this in a political sense. It seems to apply both ways. And the sad thing that happens from this is it adds to what we talked about last time of this inability to live together, which is such our problem in modernity. It's like we can't trust institutions. We can't trust public gatherings in some way. And it's like I remember seeing literally family members, calling each other out for differing political views just on Facebook, and seeing people have a public argument, and just post on someone's wall, well, you don't think this thing and you got to catch up, or you're doing this thing, you're too progressive, you're too regressive, whichever one it was seeing this public thing unfold online instead of, in the privacy of people's homes and gatherings. And it's like, what a strange thing to happen. It's like, of course it's happening in this space. That was this de-individuation. You get turned into Agent Smith to fulfill this role. And so this is kind of what we're all going through. This image is continuing to feel relevant in a deep way. Now, I want to digress for a second just to see some of Baudrillard's comments on cinema itself. And this is relevant to The Matrix. Of course, we know there are Matrix sequels and everything. And from my perspective, the sequels, they don't have the same impact as far as imagistically. The things that we're drawing that kind of just keep getting brought up in people's minds. It's like there's a few things in them that kind of stick around. I mean, they're definitely kind of funnier. They're lighter. They're more self-aware. And I think that's because there's a sense of, well, we said what we want to do, so now we're just kind of going to have some fun with it. Cinema also approaches an absolute correspondence with itself, and this is not contradictory. It is the very definition of the hyperreal, hypotyposis, and specularity. I had to look up hypotyposis, and that means like a unbelievably exact description of something. Hypotyposis and specularity. Cinema plagiarizes itself, recopies itself, remakes its classics, retroactivates its original myths, remakes the silent film more perfectly than the original, etc. All of this is logical. Cinema is fascinated by itself as a lost object, as much as it and we are fascinated by the real as a lost referent. The cinema and the imaginary, the novelistic, the mythical, unreality, including the delirious use of its own technique, used to have a lively dialectical and full dramatic relation. The relation that is being formed today between cinema and the real is an inverse, negative relation. It results from the loss of specificity of one and the other. The cold collage, the cool promiscuity, the asexual nuptials of two cold media that evolve in an asymptotic line toward each other. The cinema attempting to abolish itself in the cinematographic or televised hyperreal. Today, cinema can place all its talent, all its technology in the service of reanimating what it itself contributed to liquidating. It only resurrects ghosts, and it itself is lost therein. So again, this is 1981 that he's writing this, so that's crazy to me. This idea of cinema is fascinated by itself as a lost object, much as it and we are fascinated by the real as a lost referent. I think this is referring to this millennial buzzword, which is already had its heyday, which is just to say, oh, I'm looking for authenticity. I'm looking for, this is that search for the real. It's like, well, I want this, and yet it still always ends up being this kind of digitized version. It's this search for an ideal life, for the Instagram influencer, like quit your job kind of ideal where you're out traveling and everything. But that's the hyper real. That's not the reality itself. So his idea here is cinema is doing the same thing in reliving its own great experiences rather than making new experiences. So that unfortunately, that applies to the Matrix sequels. It applies to a lot of things we have today. And, you thought I forgot about equilibrium. We can't forget about equilibrium here.
Have you ever stood and stared at it, marveled at its beauty, its genius? Billions of people just living out their lives, oblivious. you know that the first Matrix was designed to be a perfect human world where none suffered, where everyone would be happy? It was a disaster. No one would accept the program. Entire crops were lost. Some believed that we lacked the programming language to describe your perfect world, but I believe that as a species, human beings define their reality through misery and suffering. So the perfect world was a dream that your primitive cerebrum kept trying to wake up from. Which is why the Matrix was redesigned to this, the peak of your civilization. I say your civilization because as soon as we started thinking for you, it really became our civilization, which is, of course, what this is all about. Evolution, Morpheus. Evolution. Like the dinosaur. Look out that window. You've had your time. The future is our world, Morpheus. The future is our time.
This is one of the scary things that continues to develop, I would say, is really the kind of anti-humanism that we sometimes see now, which is just, it's understandable because people are grappling with just the sordid past of humanity, as it were, and all the wrong things that we've done, which, you know, is a long list, of course. But this sense of we don't deserve to live, you know, let's just stop existing. You know, we're destroying the planet. We're doing all these things. And this is like, this is Agent Smith whispering these things into our ear and saying, you know, it's like, we're going to be running things soon, and it's going to be better really in the long run if we do this. So it's like this kind of idea hasn't gone away. We're seeing it. We're seeing people say these things really quite earnestly, and earnestly not want to have children, not want to bring more people into the world because of the darkness of the situation here.
There is another organism on this planet that follows the same pattern. Do you know what it is? A virus. Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. You are a plague, and we are the cure. Can you hear me, Morpheus? I'm going to be honest with you. I hate this place, this zoo, this prison, this reality, whatever you want to call it. I can't stand it any longer. It's the smell, if there is such a thing. I feel saturated by it. I can taste your stink. Every time I do, I fear that I've somehow been infected by it. It's repulsive, isn't it? I must get out of here. I must get free.
What happens when you use social media? It's like, it's repulsive. There's something awful about it. It's like, I mean, how many of us enjoy our phone usage? How much do we enjoy our time on whatever platform that we're on? It's like a duty. It's something. It's like, we got to get out. We got to get out of this zoo. We got to get unplugged somehow. This is the thing that it seems to be indicating. There's a deep sense in our kind of core being. It's like, I have to unplug somehow. Somehow I have to get out. And then the question is, what is the damage? What are the side effects that come from this? And yet we think all these things. We ask all those questions and everything. And yet we still use our phones and everything. It's like, well, you know, you got to just participate in the world somehow. It's like the world's going to pass you by, you know. You're going to exist this way. So this gets to this idea of, it's like there's just you know, and contrary to Agent Smith, it's like in our world, for the most part, there's just a resignation in everything. And again, it's like last time we talked about this Dada and everything, and this kind of extremism of this moment in the 20s. Today we don't have that. We have an indifference. We have a kind of isolation, and just we just sit there. We just sit in our kind of emptiness to some degree and wonder, what else could be. So again, we've got Baudrillard here with a good quote for this. The apocalypse is finished. Today it is the procession of the neutral, of forms of the neutral, and of indifference. I will leave it to be considered whether there can be a romanticism, an aesthetic of the neutral therein. I don't think so. All that remains is fascination for the desert-like and indifferent forms, for the very operation of the system that annihilates us. Now, fascination is a nihilistic passion par excellence. It is the passion proper to the mode of disappearance. We are fascinated by all forms of disappearance, of our disappearance, melancholic and fascinated, such is our general situation in an era of involuntary transparency. I think of that, idea. You just like, I just want to go sit in my house and watch Netflix and like not be seen and everything. It's like this is that indifference. This is that isolation. Of course, I picked this still from Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's like that. Just when I read that line, I was like, wow, desert-like indifference, and that scene was very resonant with people. And just the stillness of it, the isolation of it. It's like somehow people like this. The scene of the rocks just sits with me in this deep way. Everything Everywhere All at Once is definitely about this nihilistic problem. I think it like The Matrix, it describes the problem well. And the question, that we're left with is kind of what's the solution? That's harder to answer. The answer that The Matrix gives us is it's kind of through this self-generating self-realization and everything. That's where movies of our time have gone. I don't know. I don't know if that's really the way to go. I mean, if you look at the history of kind of a Nietzsche kind of perspective, a nihilistic perspective, we get you just look at the first half of the 20th century, and this is kind of working through the ideas of Nietzsche and this kind of idea of the Uberman and stepping out of society, stepping out of the system that's holding you down, and then if you can kind of escape that, you can create this grand self-identity and kind of assert yourself into the world in this powerful way. And people, unfortunately, were kind of always looking for figures like that in the world. But what happens is there's a totalitarian impulse that runs really deep in that. So it's like, from our perspective, it's this grand thing. It's like the end of the Matrix. From everyone else's perspective, it's a totalitarianism.
I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you.
All right, so there's The Matrix. Why has The Matrix stuck around? Well, it's stuck around because it's getting more and more real in some way. And it's not real in the sense of, actually we're all solipsists now and we literally think we're brains in vats. But it is more real in the sense that our world is looking like a constructed reality and we're trying to find out how to get out of it. And that is becoming increasingly relevant. It's like, how do we balance our online existence? And that's how The Matrix is getting understood, I think, in a deep way. We're seeing these relationships, maybe subconsciously, maybe consciously, of how our world feels opposed to us, and whether it's corporations or the deep state or just the vague way that the world works. I don't think, again, it has to be political. It's just how our society has unfolded. It has done so in this way that alienates us deeply from each other and gives us this sense of anonymous agents kind of looming over us and watching our every move in this way. So this is why The Matrix is stuck around. Not many films can do that. And it's also worth saying, this question of zeitgeist, it's like, well, there's not even space in our mind and our attention for something to reinvent the zeitgeist that much. It's like, this is in a sense, a once in a generation film. And Hollywood, no matter how much it wants to, it can't make a new once in a generation film except for once in a generation. Because it's like our attention are drawn to these things for non-arbitrary reasons. And unless the environment changes, there's not a new zeitgeist to define. And The Matrix is defining the zeitgeist in that way in the 90s, in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then it just becomes more and more real. So there hasn't been a new zeitgeist that needs to be defined yet. And maybe that's why we're still in this moment of sequels and everything, is because it's like, well, we're still dealing with the same stuff. And in fact, the same stuff that we had in our mind is just worse. So it's like the same problems are coming back. So we're using the same movies. We're just processing it over and over again. Yeah, I want to say something about this ending. It's always been a very powerful ending. I've always liked it. But there's something we need to be aware of in this. So this is like, this is your classic hero's journey ending, you die and you come back. And when you come back, you bring back this gift of knowledge and insight that you were able to give to the rest of the world and everything. So that's great. The trouble is, when we take this message and we put it into our real world, it's like, okay, well, everyone's the hero of their own story. And if we make the mistake of taking this message into the political realm, it's like then you have everyone is going to be realizing their ideal future. And it's like, oh, I'm going to show you a world without rules, a world without you. It's like, well, what if you count as the system in someone else's hero's journey? So this is maybe the problem with the nihilistic end state, which is this kind of Ubermensch, this idea of, realizing yourself to the fullest. It's like, well, once the rules are taken off, once God is dead, once you realize that you are the master of your own destiny, then you can realize your full potential if you can bear the weight of it. And the trouble is, if everyone does this, then you kind of have everyone's trying to realize their views of the future in this infinite way. And we talked about last time, it's like, well, one of the reasons we can't stop making sequels is because we can't agree on what the future should be. So if we make the mistake of letting us see this in the political realm, we're going to end up creating totalitarian states in some way. And this is the reason, sorry to draw on another film here, another story, this is the reason why Gandalf and Galadriel both reject when Frodo asks to give them the ring. It's because they're not nihilists. And they see the danger of actualizing the full potential of their will onto the world and everything in this unrestricted way, which is what the real gift of the ring is. It's not invisibility. It's this ability to actualize your power to the full extent in the world. It's the ring of power for that reason. But anyway, getting back to The Matrix, it's like we don't want to learn this lesson too well. So we should also say something about the Wachowskis. And I think, it would be easy to look at this and say, oh, Brian, well, they couldn't possibly have known the world was going to be like this and all this stuff. So you're kind of just reading into it, maybe too much. And it's like, well, I think there is something when we talk about kind of film analysis where we have to understand that there's a point where the director's intent ends and the way that the zeitgeist carries the movie on after and the way that the movie stands on its own. Or it's a gradation. You can definitely use what the director's intent is to read and interpret what the movie is saying. But at the end of the day, the movie stands on its own. And again, it's like they were reading Baudrillard, they were reading this kind of stuff. They had these things in mind when they made the film. So it's like, yeah, of course they didn't know that the world was going to turn out the way that it has, but they still knew, based on what they were reading, to put these kind of things in the movie and have these things on mind. So it's like, well, great job to them for noticing the trends in the world and the fact that things seem to be headed this way. And, well, sucks for us that the world is turning out the way that it is, maybe. But all credit to them for getting all these ideas into one awesome movie. Now, with respect to Baudrillard, yeah, I just want to say a few things. It's like, yeah, you know, this stuff is really heavy. It's probably heavier than maybe you signed up for when you watched this video, so thanks for sticking with it. Yeah, I just want to say, like, this is just one guy's perspective on the world. I think it accurately describes the problem that we have, in so much as we are in this digital hellscape, so to speak. In so much as we participate in the system, as it were, then Baudrillard describes the problem well, but it doesn't mean that we have to accept the nihilistic solution. It doesn't mean that we have to really accept his vision of how terrible life can be in that sense. Yeah, I was just yesterday, I was driving and kind of thinking about this presentation and everything, reading Baudrillard and everything, and it was like I came and I was you know, driving to a park basically, and I had my GPS on and everything, and I was thinking about this line: the territory no longer precedes the map, nor does it survive it. It is nevertheless the map that precedes the territory, the procession of the simulacra. It is the real and not the map whose vestiges persist here and there, and in the deserts that are no longer those of the empire, but ours, the desert of the real itself. So I read that earlier, and it's like, I'm sitting there, I'm looking at my GPS, and I'm like, the map precedes the territory. I'm like, oh my gosh. You know, here I am going to this park, which is like, it's not paved. It's like a nice abandoned place that not many people go to. And it's like, I'm walking and I'm like, this is the desert of the real. No one cares about this. This is a place that isn't stolen and appropriated by technology for social media purposes and everything. It's the desert. It's the desert of the real. And then I think, well, hold on, no, this is not a desert. This is a forest. This is a wonderful place. You know, so it's like this view, like this guy, he can really get in your head, and you don't want him there forever. It's like, it's a good critique, but anytime that you step out of that, anytime that you have a wonderful meal with friends and family, it's like you are escaping Baudrillard's view. You are stepping out of that view of the world. So let it be a critique, but don't let it get you down too much. You know, we're more than that. So thanks. You know, we'll talk to you guys on the next one.